But we will maybe just start and then people can trickle in more. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to share my slides, right? So let me just see here. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Let me just make sure that I have it listed, your faces, so it's on top. So I'm actually looking at you guys while presenting here. But I'd like to welcome you all on today's presentation and session on expanding your business to Silicon Valley. Today I have a wonderful group of people, actually two. Aaron McDaniel, who is on this call, who's going to talk about expanding to Silicon Valley. And then we have Yoshiaki Yeda-san, who is a Japanese founder, co-founder and CEO of Cinnamon AI that we worked with in the past, and has recently somewhat expanded his business to the US, and is going to share a bit about that process and the learnings that we've had over the course of the years. And so today's agenda, I'll quickly do some opening remarks. Then we'll just do a quick introduction of each of the speakers. And then I'll go into give you a quick overview of 10x Innovation Lab just for context. And then afterwards, we'll step into doing the fireside chat with Yoshiaki Yeda-san from Cinnamon. And then afterwards, we'll have the talk on ways to grow and expand your business during COVID-19 by Aaron. Obviously, based on all the experience that we've had, having worked with a lot of founders from Japan and the world in general, which I'll explain a bit more about in a couple of minutes. So why this session today? Well, we have actually been selected to lead a virtual acceleration program by Tokyo Metropolitan Government and JETRO and local partners there in Japan. So this is going to be launched in October. And so right now there's an application or call for application, if you will, running, and the deadline is September 14th. So if you're a startup from Japan and you want to tackle global markets and Silicon Valley specifically, this is an opportunity for you to join this virtual acceleration program where we can help you train and prepare for US expansion, and in the process also connecting you to potential customers, partners, and investors in Silicon Valley. And so the program objectives for that program is to, one, understand business culture in Silicon Valley, learn how to do business in the US in general, help you refine your business communication skills, feedback on business models, practice your presentation skills in general and body language as well, and then improve your investor and customer pitch decks. And then post the whole program where we've trained you and connected you and had conversation with you, will measure the impact and help you decide the next steps in your expansion. And so why is this important and why do we do these programs? Well, there's actually a lot of challenges as you want to explore a potential expansion to other markets and Silicon Valley specifically. Japan and Silicon Valley is very different from a how to do business perspective, culture, linguistics, etc. So we try to help bridge that gap essentially. So I'm sure Yoshiaki-san will touch on some of these points as well, but it's really hard to network or connect to a new market without any prior connections, right? So this is here where we come in as an organization that are credible, that's already been established in Silicon Valley. We can help you navigate that environment essentially. Then also what we see a lot of Japanese founders specifically are often forgetting is selling the traction and that they've had in that market when they talk to investors, showcasing some use cases. So you build that credibility in front of the people that you're trying to sell your company to, whether you're trying to raise capital or sell to a customer, etc. Highlighting all those success stories is really, really important. And the way, in terms of formality of interaction in Japan versus Silicon Valley is very different, right? In Silicon Valley, it's very fast paced, right? We get to the point very, very quickly, whereas in Japan, it's a bit more of a slower dance, if you will. I won't go into details, but at a high level, things are just moving very, very fast. The way we communicate, email etiquette and the speed of follow-up is also very different. As an example, in Japan, you like to collect all the information before you follow up and send an email, versus in Silicon Valley, we follow up and say, hey, within 24 hours typically, hey, great meeting with you, had a great conversation. These are some of the main points that we talked about. I'll follow up in 2 weeks once I've gathered more information and have more concrete points as to next steps and so forth. So there's just a very different way of essentially engaging with a potential customer or investor. The use of adoption at agile and sort of what we call building while in flight. So companies often, as they're developing a solution, they use the customer feedback and feed that back to the product, versus where you see a lot of Japanese founders, not all, of course, they're building a lot on assumptions and less on data, right? So they don't really get out of the building and talking to the customer and validate that there's a need, which is very, very important if you want to build a successful business. And also, when we talk to founders, they often focus on investors first, whereas we always say focus on customers and the investors will follow essentially. And so another point that is very important is also the founder alignment as you want to explore an expansion. And that's a point also that I think Yoshiaki will talk a bit more about, how you build that internal alignment to pursue an expansion. So today's speakers, again, is myself, Klaus Vihe. I've been in Silicon Valley for 6 years. I'm originally from Denmark. I've worked and helped launch a product in Vietnam. I worked and lived in Chile. I came to Silicon Valley 6 years ago to study my MBA. Found my wife the first week while being in San Francisco. That solidified my stay. She's American, and I've been in Silicon Valley ever since, and have worked for another organization called Silicon Valley Forum, which is one of the oldest nonprofits promoting innovation entrepreneurship. So I work with tons of founders that want to build a business in the US and help essentially bridge between international markets and Silicon Valley. And then I'd like to invite Aaron to do a short introduction, and then I also like to invite Yoshiaki afterwards to do an introduction. But I'll let Aaron introduce himself, and then 2 years ago when we founded the company as well. Aaron? Are you here? Or did he drop out? Oh, he's here? Okay. Well, maybe Yoshiaki-san, maybe you can do a short introduction.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining today. My name is Yoshi. I am co-founder and CEO at Cinnamon AI. Cinnamon AI is Tokyo headquartered AI company that provide AI automation for large corporations to transform unstructured data into actionable insights. Today we have offices in Japan, Vietnam, and Taiwan, and I'd like to expand to the US as well. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Okay. I see maybe we have an issue with Aaron. He's coming back right there. There you go. So Aaron, if you don't mind making a short introduction, and also why we established 10x Innovation Lab as well.
Sure. Yep. Sorry about that. So Aaron McDaniel, I have a career that sort of fit into 3 different parts. So I started in corporate at AT&T as part of their leadership development program, their future executive program. I worked in a number of different areas, was one of the youngest to serve as regional vice president there. And toward the end of my time, I was actually working with AT&T's Foundry Corporate Innovation Center. And then I transitioned over to become a serial entrepreneur, started a number of companies, a number of failures, 3 of which were acquired. And then I was actually asked to teach entrepreneurship and innovation at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, so sort of that third part of my career. And around that time, I started teaching is when Klaus and I had co-founded 10x Innovation Lab. And so we work with both corporate as well as entrepreneurs to basically help them implement the Silicon Valley mindset, connect in with the Silicon Valley, as well as for startups in particular, do what we call market validation, where we're actually helping you evaluate entering a foreign market, but in particular in the United States, and facilitating different introductions of potential customers, potential investors, and thought leaders to validate your ideas, as well as just helping you, just support you entering into the Silicon Valley ecosystem. So We do a number of different programs, virtual programs like we're virtual right now, having entrepreneurs come to the Silicon Valley or coming to Japan or other countries to have different programs that we do in person.
Exactly. Beautiful. And a bit of a funny story. Aaron's wife and my wife, their mothers are best friends, so we're kind of stuck together a bit. So we cannot argue. We have to be kind to each other, otherwise the families and our mother-in-laws will be after us. So we have to be kind and respectful to each other. I don't like him all the time, but most of the time he's okay. So no, I'm joking. Great. So I'll just do very, very quickly here, right? So Aaron mentioned we're a cross-border innovation agency, and we offer tailored programs for different segments, right? And we do our basically, let me see, I will change. We basically take a trifecta approach, right? Where we work at, again, what Aaron said, corporates, universities, and governments, all around, all focused on ecosystem development with the focus of building entrepreneurial capabilities within all these different areas. And so we provide what we call lifecycle support for entrepreneurs and startups, essentially. And so all the way from the ideation stage to the expansion. And that's the gamut that we serve, where the program that we're doing with Tokyo is we're in validation to launch, scale, and expand. So we work with a lot of different government organizations, NETO, METI, J-Startup, JETRO, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, etc. And so we're very blessed to have the fortunate opportunity to have worked with a lot of Japanese founders, quite frankly. And so again, startup programs, boot camps, online courses, soft landing, and acceleration. And this is just some of the impact numbers that we have, right? 50 countries, 1,500 founders, 2,500 executives, and a little red text there. We work with more than 175 Japanese startups. But enough about us. I want to go into having a conversation with one of our favorite entrepreneurs, actually. We've had the pleasure of working with Yoshiaki-san in one of the previous programs with NETO. And I think his experience having expanded Cinnamon AI to Silicon Valley and to the US in general, actually, because they're based out of Austin, is quite interesting, and it gives you also a realistic sense on the process and the time it takes to actually expand the business, because sometimes people forget that it actually requires a lot of commitment, quite frankly. And so I want to bring obviously Yoshiaki forward here, and then we're going to be starting a little fireside chat, and then after that it wraps up, we can take a couple of questions. Then we'll move into Aaron's presentation, and then at the end of the call, we can take some more questions. So does that sound okay? Yeah. And if you don't mind, put on your videos so we can see everyone. We can see if you're happy, smiling, or confused, because that way we can also better interact with you guys. So don't be afraid to be on video. We won't judge you, even if you have a bad hair day. I think a lot of us actually have a bad hair day in general. Actually, I'm okay. My wife just cut my hair the other day, so I think I'm pretty well equipped right now. But Yoshiaki-san, thank you so much for being on today's call. Really appreciate you always, being willing to support us on these various programs. And I'm personally excited to hear a bit more about your current situation as well, because it's been some time since we've touched base, right? But as a start on this fireside chat, why don't you tell the audience a bit about your entrepreneurial journey so they get a bit of context on, your path as an entrepreneur?
Okay, so let me explain about my career. So I started my career in Tokyo, and I worked in Tokyo for about 8 years. But I was aiming at becoming a global entrepreneur. So when I was early 30s, I moved into Singapore to join P&G Singapore as a brand manager. So in Singapore, I was in charge of global marketing for 3 years. Then where I acquired some confidence that how I work with multi-national background teams and also countries. Then at age of 33, or actually 34, I decided to pursue my entrepreneur journey challenge. So I started my first company when I was at 34 in Singapore. I started a startup by using social network to connect people. That is a recruiting platform. And I had some angel investment and also some investment from venture capital as well. And I experienced a journey for 3 years, but unfortunately, the business didn't fly. And I needed to shut it down about 4 years ago. In the meanwhile, through my first entrepreneur journey, I have met my friends in Singapore who actually turned into my co-founders, Miss Miku and also Dr. Hajime, where I met them in Singapore. So after I gave up my first startup, the two friends asked me to join the current AI company. Well, actually, it was before becoming an AI company. So they told me, hey, we tried to create an AI company. Do you want to help me? Or can you help me? So I started to join my current company to support the two founders from the business side, because they are both very technical engineer researchers. So they don't understand the B2B business especially. And then I have B2B business experience when I was in Japan. And so that was the initial, I think 3 months, 6 months were more for contract basis. But I joined my current company as a contractor to support the two founders. So this is the beginning of my current journey. It was about 2016.
I think this is a perfect example where you try to build a team with different capabilities, right? Because also we see a lot of Japanese companies having highly technical teams and startups, but they're lacking a bit on the business side. And it's a perfect example of bringing somebody in like Yoshiaki to support in commercializing that technology, right?
Right.
And so you actually,
another aspect that I want to add here is when I look back when I looked at my failure of my first startup, I realized that I needed two factors. In fact, I was the single founder of the startup company. I had a good VP of engineering, VP of product, and I have a good sales member, but I was the single founder. So I felt very alone to think about a very high level direction or very complex discussion with investor. So one lesson for me is I should have a good management teams in the beginning, because how we can go far, how far we can go is with whom we will go. So I thought I should have a good founding teams, and also I should select a right market to grow, because the business I chose was a very promising in Japan. I actually copied a model which was working in Japan. It's actually still working in Japan. And I tried to copy the model into Southeast Asia, but in the end, the business model didn't work in Southeast Asia. Actually, the company also, the Japanese company tried to expand to Singapore and Indonesia, but it seemed like they didn't have a good success, despite they have the good software basis. So creating right teams and selecting a right market are two important factors if I wanted to continue my entrepreneurial journey. And then I had a perfect match with my current teams. As Klaus mentioned, I and the two other co-founders have complementary experience skills, and AI, the AI market that currently we are choosing is very promising. So that's why I thought this is a perfect opportunity, and for me, that's why I jumped in the opportunity.
Awesome. Wonderful comments. Yeah. So talking a bit about building the team, you didn't start to get traction in Japan. You built some pretty good relationships and a customer base, right? So what led you to pursue a potential expansion to the US? Can you share some thoughts around that?
Right. So while we were creating the business base in Japan, by the way, our main customers are large corporations, especially in insurance and banking originally. Now we are recently expanding to manufacturers as well. But within co-founders, we had discussed how we can expand our growth opportunities. And then one of the aspiration for us from the day one is we want to create the global #1 business AI company. That is our big vision and also aspiration. And then the reason why we started from Japan, whereas we were actually originally met in Singapore, but we strategically chose Japan because the three of founders are Japanese. So we have some nationality advantages to choose Japan. And Japan, when we look at the software market, probably the Japan is still number two or number 3 software industry market. So that's why we started off from Japan as a strategic choice. But when we think about global expansion, where is the largest market? Definitely it's the North America. That's why, and very strategic reasons, we aim at the US. Of course, the competition will be hard, but if we can acquire, let's say 5% or 10% of the market share, this is a huge growth opportunity for our company. That's why we decided to take some risks at that moment.
Awesome, fantastic. And so taking that leap and that journey in trying to expand a business into a whole new market can be very daunting to many. And from what I see specifically for Japanese companies that are very comfortable in their local markets, right? Where do you start with, exploring that expansion? What were some of the initial steps that you did, and maybe some tactical recommendations that you can make?
Right. So, the interesting fact is I went to the US in the first time in 2018 when I was age 38. But it was my first time to go to the US. Although I traveled over 30 countries for backpacking, but I didn't go to the US, never. So it was my first time to go to the US. I had some friends, but very limited friends, maybe like 5 friends in the US. And then I leveraged the opportunity of the program of Made by Class, the Next Lab, in Silicon Valley. So it was a 1-week program in Silicon Valley, but I extended my stay in the US, 1 week in New York, 1 week in San Francisco, and 1 week in Silicon Valley for the program, so that I can leverage my stay in the US. And then, so I started my preparation was I should talk with the relevant people to understand the market. Especially, I had a hypothesis what the customer pain looks like. Is it similar, the same as Japan, or completely different? And then I tried to ask my friends and also investors to introduce anyone who is in IT industry. Then I met, during my stay in the US, I also asked those who met in the time, make some referral to meet some people. Let's say during my stay in New York, I requested to, I think I met like 5-10 people who made a connection during my stay there. So within the 3 weeks, including the 10 extra program, I made around 30 to 40 appointments with people who is in IT industry, so that I can confirm my first gut feeling whether there's a market, competition, and customer insights. So those are my first steps to go to the US.
Awesome. Beautiful. And so it kind of touches a bit on what you just mentioned, but maybe we can dig a bit deeper, right? So what are some of the key questions that you needed to answer from your customers in order to validate the US market?
Right. So the most important question, or most important objective was validate the customer's pain, because we provide product or solution to solve the customer pains. But if the customer doesn't have a pain, the solution or product are meaningless. So that's why, as I said, we have some customer base in Japan, and we have confirmed the customer pain, which is the enterprise customer have repetitive tasks, and that's why people are very unproductive. And this is the big and broad hypothesis, probably which applies probably across the world. But and then it seems like it seems like obvious and then true ground for every single country, but I thought I should validate it first, because there are so many entrepreneurs who blindly believes that the customer must have this pain. But this is usually like just imagination or completely misunderstanding, or the founder looks at what they want to look, right? So that's why my single first objective was validate the customer. Do they have repetitive tasks? Do they want to pay? Are they replaced by IT already or not? If not, why? And if they can replace those repetitive tasks by hiring some AI systems, are they willing to pay for it? So those are the basic, but very basic, but the most important question that I have listed even before I fly to the US. And then for every people I met, I asked the same question and tried to validate my hypothesis by listening to the customer's pain, not selling anything.
I think that's a perfect final comment that you're mentioning right now, is that, you know, when you launch a business in your home market, obviously in this case, Japan, and you're seeing growth and customers like your product, you can't assume that that will be the same in another market, Silicon Valley as an example, right? And so you need to go back to validate whether or not there's a there and need, right? You know, you may have to communicate your business differently. The business model might be different. Your go-to-market strategy may be different. You may be selling to someone different internally in the business. For example, us as a business 10x, we sell to people in new business development in Japan, which is not a role that exists here in the US, right? So there's a lot of local things that you need to learn more about, and especially around the need of the customer. And so that's a perfect comment. Thanks for sharing that, Yoshiaki. And so how long did it take for you to validate the US market? Because it doesn't come in one day. Rome was not built in one day, right? So explain a bit more about the timeline that you went through.
Right. To confirm the initial customer's validation, so I obtained the gut feeling for my first visit of the 3 weeks. Then I came back to Japan. Then I talked with the management teams and shared my gut feeling. And we tried to, but still it was my gut feeling. So we tried to validate the gut feeling or pain. And then I think if my memory is correct, I flew to the US again after probably about 2 months later. And I stayed there for about 100 days and tried to meet potential customer as much as possible. And in total, I think I created probably 50 or 60 business meetings with potential customers. And then finally confirmed that the original hypothesis is correct, because I talked with the potential customers, for example, meaningfully large size, and then who are willing, who have some IT budget. Then I confirmed the repetitive tasks, and then they personally or company, they want to eliminate those repetitive tasks. So again, to summarize, I think it took about 3 months to validate the customer validation.
Now, when you want to expand the business and you obviously have a founding team, it is incredibly important that there's alignment, right? And there's a great communication, obviously, from you to try to pursue that expansion and bring that information back to the founding team. So you build alignment in terms of adding more resources to pursue it even further. Can you tell me a bit more about the conversation? Not obviously, the intimate conversations, if you will, but how did you build that alignment with the team to give you obviously that freedom to explore the US market?
The communication with the internal teams in Japan.
Yeah, the founding team. Yeah, your co-founders.
Right. So I actually led the conversation, and then I actually create some how do I say risks and opportunity matrix.
Okay.
For x-axis, I put the timeline, like next 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months or something. And for y-axis, I put the certainty and uncertainty. So the lower is almost like confirmed, and the highest is uncertain. Then by looking at the matrix, we have like timeline and certainties. I created like 9 quadrant with matrix. Then US is one of the company activities. For example, another initiative that we had was opening a Taiwan office. So at that moment, we have offices in Vietnam, Hanoi, and Ho Chi Minh, but we aim at opening the office in Taiwan as well. So we had I listed up like 5, 6, or I'll say probably 9, 10 initiatives that we wanted to do. And then I put those activities on the matrix. And then we decided to balance between something more clear and tangible and others for more uncertain and unclear, but that's why we needed to take some risks. And by communicating with the priority and necessary risks, we decided to take some risks on US expansion. So that's why managing both for short term and long term, and establishing more concrete and uncertainty. And we think we need to take some necessary risks. So that was the conversation that I had with my co-founders.
Awesome, awesome. I'm going to skip some of the questions and focus on the more important ones, just because of time. What elements of your business model, operating model, product or go-to-market strategy did you have to change to find product market fit in the US?
Sorry, could you say the question again?
So what elements of your business model, operating model, product or go-to-market strategy did you have to change to find product market fit? Were there any insights there where you had to tweak things a bit to find that product market fit?
Thankfully, I think given the problems are similar between in Japan and actually very, very similar. And then customer responses are also very similar. And that's why we don't need to change our activity fundamentally. Of course, there are some differences. Let's say when we look at marketing or sales pitch. Yeah, but for example, if you stay in the US, it's definitely common, but for B2, even though B2B sales, we don't meet face to face. Most of the business conversation will be done by recently by Zoom or some online calls. Whereas in Tokyo, large corporate before COVID-19, but large corporation prefer face to face. So all the business meeting were done by face to face. So of course there are these kind of differences, but fundamental approach, we try to acquire some leads. We make some follow-up emails and set up meetings and ask some, for the sales process, there is a very important factor called BANT, budget, authority, needs, and time. Checking those BANT is like a golden principle either in Japan and in the US. So I think for my case was just lucky, but we didn't need to change our go-to-market strategy so much. So, but I think that was a coincidence.
Okay, awesome. If you could highlight 3 things that you wish you had known beforehand, obviously starting this process of expanding a business, what would those be?
Maybe I not come up with 3 ideas immediately, but the first things I came up to me was the hiring cost for the people in Silicon Valley or in general in the US, because I would say the average salary in the US is probably one of the top, or probably definitely more expensive than in Japan. And also Silicon Valley pricing is like crazy. I would say some good sales guy say, hey, I need to 500,000 USD or 700,000 USD as a base. Then I need more commission. Wow, this is huge expense. And then, of course, there are some more reasonable member, but there are some reasons why they are reasonable as well. So that's why, and also compared to the people in Japan, or maybe in Taiwan or Vietnam, the linkage or loyalty to the company is relatively lower. So if they don't like it, I'm going to quit because there are so many offers. So that's why those kind of dynamics are, of course, I heard that, but the impact of this is huge because the hiring cost, I mean, the headcount cost initially impacts for P&L, especially in the beginning, where we are usually unable to generate the revenue from the day one, and we need to accept some risks of being negative in the US market. But those kind of hiring costs, and I would say, given that we are B2B company, how we create some self-discipline, sales management, including incentivization as well. So those are very probably unique in each country. Probably it's different in the US, in Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Vietnam. So those need some expertise and experience.
No, totally. Can you recommend any resources for Japanese founders that want to, that they can tap into, to help with their expansion? Any specific resources you leverage?
Definitely, Mr. Klaus. Well, so I recommend. I mean, the reason why I said Klaus is not just joking, but seriously. So you need to meet right person who have similar experience or similar expertise in your business. For example, my case, through my journey, I started to realize, okay, sales management is probably critically important here. So I requested Klaus and other friends, hey, can you introduce me to someone who have strong B2B sales management experience? And then I wanted to understand what's our standard, what the protocol, principles, and what how we can motivate or even how we can penalize them. And those are something knowledge, experience I have nurtured by talking with like seasoned, experienced people. And then probably if you are in B2C or some like a device company, you should talk with those who have experience already. That's why asking right question to right people is critically important to leverage your time.
I agree. There's something we say in the US: don't reinvent the wheel. It's already been made. So talk to somebody that actually made it, essentially. So use those resources, tap into people's expertise. Is definitely something I would almost argue that a lot of Japanese founders forget to do. In kind of asking for things and asking for feedback and try to learn from others. Doing that is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of acknowledgement that you are not an expert in everything. So learn from others instead. And so as a final, maybe a question here, Yoshiaki, what is the one most important piece of advice you can give to any founder, as they're evaluating whether or not to expand internationally?
Some tips, advice for internet expansions.
Yeah, one most important advice. What is the one key thing that you want to leave them with from this session?
Yeah, I think probably going back to my previous comment, but understand the customer is the most important point. And then I have seen many founders who blindly believes that my brilliant solution works in this market. That's why we go to this country. And this is like a typical mistake of entrepreneurs. So know your customer is very important.
Yeah, perfect. That's wonderful. Awesome. Well, I'm going to give you a round of applause. I know you're not going to hear everybody, but imagine you have a stadium. You're at Bernabeu or something in Spain, and people clapping. I really appreciate your time today, Yoshiaki, and thanks for coming to share some of your insights and obviously your entrepreneurial journey and specifically the expansion of Cinnamon AI. So I look forward to catching up with you hopefully soon in Japan or in the US if you can come over very soon. I'd love to catch up with you in person once we are able to do that post COVID-19. So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. And then it was my pleasure. And thank you for everyone for your time as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have anything you want to share in the chat, you can just share that as well, Yoshiaki. So feel free to drop any notes there if need be. Great. So now we're going to move on to the other segment. I'm going to have my co-founder Aaron, who I've married with, having this business with essentially. He's going to talk about international expansion and scaling startups to new markets. So, Aaron, I'll leave the floor to you, and you can take the lead from now.
Sounds good. Are you able to see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. All right. So thank you very much, Klaus, and thank you, Yoshiaki-san. We appreciate you sharing your insights and your partnership with us. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about some best practices when it comes to international expansion, and some of this were things that you heard within the Cinnamon story just a few minutes ago, but some of it some additional things that we at 10x have seen as we've worked with a number of different startups, Japanese startups, and from other countries who are looking to enter the US market. So there are really 3 steps that you go through as you're launching an international expansion program. The first being the preparation stage, where you're evaluating a potential market, you're adapting your model to prepare your organization, and getting everybody's buy-in around the expansion. Then the next step is validating, or we call it the ignite step, validating the market through testing and stakeholder building. So this is where you're having those conversations that Yoshiaki had spoke about. You know, it was his one big takeaway from talking was around the importance of interacting with customers. And so that is happening a lot in this stage 2. And then finally in stage 3, there's the expansion phase or liftoff phase. And part of that is where you're pivoting or adapting your model in order to better fit the market. So in Cinnamon's case, it was something that didn't require drastic changes to the revenue model or changes to the product and features, but were just small tweaks around marketing, as Yoshiaki-san had shared. But for some companies, it might be more drastic changes that are needed. So let's talk about that first stage, the prepare stage. So, you know, everything to a certain extent has changed, or at least if not permanently, at least temporarily, because of the pandemic and COVID. And you know, one thing is just cultural differences, but also just because of the pandemic, some trends and some behaviors have accelerated. So Yoshiaki-san had mentioned that a lot of business was done virtually as opposed to face-to-face. And so that's accelerated even more because of the pandemic and restrictions of people being able to come together because of the health concerns. So you just understanding that and framing that, you know, for some, that might be challenging, but really we at 10x think that it presents an interesting opportunity. If you're having to manage a virtual team just across different places within your own country, or not being able to work in an office, well, it's not that much of a leap to then have to manage people virtually in other countries, besides some time zone differences. And so it really creates this opportunity to take advantage of being virtual to increase your you know, your overall presence and potentially enter new markets. You know, number 2, we obviously have to think about where we would want to expand, the right market size opportunity. For Cinnamon, they saw that North America was the next biggest market to go after. The size of the market is important, but there are other elements that you would evaluate as well, like barriers to entry, any type of regulatory or legal challenges or opportunities that would be part of the process of expanding. There are a lot of cultural differences as well. We mentioned some of those. That was part of the conversation. Klaus talked about how there are certain behaviors we've seen with Japanese founders coming to the United States, and that adjustment period for what meeting follow-up looks like, what that interaction looks like, what information is shared in the process, how the relationship building works. All of those things differ. Then, so there's also not necessarily knowing different business practices or knowing different legal requirements that you have. And so just going through that whole adjustment of how a company needs to operate, depending on the country you expand to, some countries will require you to have a local legal entity in the country, or maybe even a physical presence where employees are operating there. Some allow it to be virtual. Understanding that is important. And then what I was mentioning before, that whole recalibration or adapting your business model, your operating model, how you market the product itself to best fit that new market. And then, as a point 7 here at the bottom of the slide, you have to expect that the competitors that are in that market that you're entering are going to adapt with you entering the market. They're not just going to sit and let you steal that market share. So you have to understand where the market is in terms of whether it's still a new market or it's a very mature market, and who the competitors are, and anticipating possibly what some of their responses will be. Because some competitors may be very aggressive because they don't want any new international entrants. They might lower prices drastically or something along those lines. But there's also that opportunity for you to come in with a differentiated solution compared to the competition. So now, as I mentioned a bit, the cultural difference is just a little bit more detail. So, in the Silicon Valley, as an example, it's very natural for people to reach out to others that they don't know, they have no connection with. We call that a cold introduction, and that's acceptable. It's also very natural for people to facilitate introductions or warm introductions, where we might know people in our network that we connect you with that might be potential customers or investors or thought leaders that help you validate your idea. And then networking is just very open. People are very used to sharing information, helping each other. And then the other thing that we noticed that's a big cultural difference, and Klaus mentioned this earlier, is sometimes, whereas if you are a Silicon Valley founder from the United States, you're very loud about your accomplishments and your traction. And culturally, it's a little different in Japan. And so being a little bit more open about your credibility, the progress you've made, is important, because that often helps relationships go farther, faster, when they know that you've validated your business idea and are a very credible and established business to work with. Then that next stage is the ignite stage. So during this stage, you're actually doing you're going through what we call at 10X our global validation framework. And so what we've done is we've adapted the lean canvas or business model canvas, which is sort of a dynamic one-page business plan, to basically focus on having the right model to validate whether it's right for you to enter a market. And this is a question that Klaus had asked earlier around what questions did you need to ask, or did Cinnamon need to ask, in order to validate whether their business was right for the US market. And so coming up with those questions and answering those questions are really important. And sometimes when we help founders who are interested in entering the US market, it might not be the right time, but we help them understand these are the steps that they need to take in order to then be ready to expand later. And so, it's an important process you go through in answering those questions to determine whether that market is the right fit. And so if you look at the different quadrants on the screen, you'll see some of them are really revisiting those core elements to how you distribute your product, your marketing, who your target customer base is, how you would operate that business, and then some foundational elements at the bottom that are in the gray squares around whether you'd have a local presence and having the human resource the human resource structure in order to support that. Oftentimes, local partnerships can be very important in being introduced to customers and distributing your product. And then things like government regulation and cultural translation, which I mentioned. So those are some of the first steps you go through. Then there's obviously important considerations just around currency exchange and pricing. There's a whole business around transfer pricing for holding currency in the right place to deal with currency shifts in the capital markets. going through the process of virtually testing, getting that feedback from customers, like Cinnamon did, not just talking to customers, but coming up with tests and pilots to validate that customers still have the same needs and do want that solution that you're providing in the market you're interested in. And then we talked about the power a moment ago, the power of partners who can be catalysts to help you enter the market, to handle some of the cultural changes, and ultimately translate your new model to work in that country. And then finally, there's the third step, which is the expand step. And so one of the first things that happens in the expansion step, and I won't go through all of these in details, but often you will have to pivot some part of your business. It could be determining that, maybe you were focused on larger enterprises in Japan, but your solution works better for a mid-market customer in the United States or in Europe, wherever you're expanding. So you might need to adapt who your target customer is. You might have to adapt your revenue model. You might have a subscription model in your home market, but you might need to change to a licensing model that's a little different in the new market that you're entering. It might be a difference of how you distribute. You might be distributing directly in Japan, but you might need to go through a third-party retailer or partner in order to distribute in the United States, as an example. And then also there's just focusing on features. There are times where one feature might resonate in Japan, but it might not resonate in the United States, or you might need to add additional features to really fit the use cases in that new country. So many different examples. Like I said, I won't go through all of them in detail. Then you need to reach your end customer. The way we talk about it at 10X is finding out where your customers hang out. And I'm not talking about where they go after work to the bar, but often virtually where they get information, who their influencers are, who their recommenders are, who they follow on social media, who they follow in the news or bloggers, and getting that message in front of that target customer. Then in this expansion stage, there are challenges from managing remotely from another country, and whether you have local employees or not, and then just shifting your model to best fit that. And then, there's always challenges of things that, you have to adapt as you're culturally changing. And so, ultimately that affects what your business looks like to be successful in a new market. So again, these are the three steps: the preparation step, the ignite step, and the expansion step. When we work with startups that are part of our programs, with these entrepreneurs, we are customizing our solution to best fit your industry and your stage of the company growth, whether you're more early on or you've hit product market fit, the amount of funding you have, etc. So we customize that to best fit your needs, because every international expansion evaluation, every market validation is different, and we'll have a different path, different pivots, different timeline. And then also along these lines of this message around market validation, Klaus and I are developing a book that we're going to be launching that is a great guide for entrepreneurs who are interested in international expansion, in particular in the Silicon Valley, but really it's something that applies everywhere, including the global framework that I went through just a moment ago at a high level. So we'll now transition over to questions. It can be questions about the content that I talked about market validation. It can be questions for Yoshiaki-san and Cinnamon's journey. It can be questions for Klaus as well. So let's open up the floor. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions, but we also have the chat. So if you don't feel comfortable speaking, maybe if your English skills aren't as good, you can type out a question and we can do our best to answer that as well. So I'll pass it back to Klaus.
Yeah, so if you have any questions also afterwards, we have the conversation table. So after this Q&A, I'll just conclude with some final comments, and then I will be moving over to the conversation table as well. But feel free to ask any questions if you have any. silence before the storm.
I think that just means the session was very comprehensive and we covered a lot of things, right?
Probably TMI, as we say in the US, too much information. So the head is exploding. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds if you have any questions. No? Well, I'll just maybe just conclude with some final comments then from today, basically. Let me just find the right slide here. There you go. So as mentioned before, if you're an entrepreneur or a startup, you're interested in expanding into the US and Silicon Valley specifically, we are going to be running this program starting later at the end of the month in early October with a boot camp. So the way that it works, there's an application phase that ends here on the 14th. We'll then select 15 companies to go into the boot camp at the end of this month, going into early of October, where we're going to be working with 15 entrepreneurs. Then out of those 15, we'll select 8 startups going into the virtual acceleration program. And that's a bi-weekly program where we have individual mentoring, speaking sessions, and also where we help connect different you to potential customers, partners, or investors. So it's basically a hybrid between education, mentoring, and also setting up meetings. So this is very highly customized to each individual participant. So if you feel like this is something that's interesting, by all means, you can apply directly on the page that I can send to you on the chat. Let me just find this chat here. Where do we have the chat? Let me see here. There we go. XUP Tokyo Outbound Program. You could find it right there. And if you have any questions to both Aaron and I.
We can't see any message on the chat.
Oh, it says, oh wait, let me see here. It's because it was, let me see here. There, and then if you want to reach out to Aaron and I for either the program or other things that we can help you with, you can just simply reach out to us here with our email. And also, I usually tend to share my LinkedIn as well, should you want to connect there. Then you can also connect with both Aaron and I there. So if you don't have any questions, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be concluding today's call. And what I'm going to be doing as well is I'm going to be moving over to the conversation table. Unfortunately, this handsome guy won't be there. It's only me. I'm not as handsome as that guy. So you're going to have to live with me at the conversation table. But if you have any questions, more specifically about the process of the program, how we work with entrepreneurs, and our partnership with Jetro. And by the way, I see Takanari-san on the call. Hi, Takanari-san, who is actually our partner for the program. Then you can simply meet with me at the conversation table, and I'll probably stay there for about half an hour or so if you want to engage with me, because it's actually 2 a.m. in San Francisco, and I probably need to get some sleep very soon as well. But I'll be there for about half an hour, and obviously if I have great conversation, I can stay there a bit more. So thank you so much to Venture Cafe Tokyo, and obviously to Jetro, who's on the call. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sure.
In San Francisco, how's the red cloud doing from the firestorms?
It was orange actually, and throughout the day, in the early morning, it was really bad, and then slowly cleared up. I'm not sure how it's going to be looking like tomorrow, but obviously right now we can't see it because it's completely dark. But it was like being in that movie Blade Runner as they fly into the desert, basically. So it's a very interesting experience, I would say. So completely orange throughout, basically. So imagine Donald Trump's hair, very orange. That's basically how the city looked like.
So it's almost like in Japan, you had that nuclear plant that blew up, and
yeah,
the fallout, and now you guys got this, and I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, but I thought of a relationship from Japan with the fact of what they went through with that, that connection and everything.
Yeah. With 2020 has been an interesting year with a lot of challenges for many people with the COVID-19 situation, and obviously fires and earthquakes and everything. And so let's hope for, better times with less, disruption. On the technology front, okay with disruption, but not on, I guess, climate and all that stuff. That we prefer to have things being a bit more stable than it has been for the past half year or so.
I saw a innovation with face shields that now they made a face shield that mounts on your shoulders so that Nancy Pelosi can get her hair washed.
There you go.
Someone called like Z shields or something like that. And it mounts on your shoulders and then it flips down, and so that way that product just came out in the marketplace.
Oh, there you go. Let's see. How much they're selling and the traction.
I think $24.99.
Oh, there you go. Great price.
Z shield.
It's funny. Okay, but if you want to go to the networking table, I'll be there. And thanks to Yoshiaki-san for contributing and sharing his experience, highly valuable. So if you want to connect with an entrepreneur that has gone through the journey and can share a lot of insights, he's definitely the go-to guy. By the way, he's good at drinking a beer as well, so you can always invite him out for a beer also. So I'll leave it there, and I'll see you at the conversation table. And thanks to everyone again for joining this call. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Klaus, Yoshiaki-san, and then Aaron. Thank you so much. And then we have a conversation table at the networking space, so please join us. I just put the link into the chat, so it would be great if you could join to the Remo. And then 日本語でもですね、対応させていただき